Daniel noticed the change before he could name it. Miriam no longer filled the room with questions or stories. She moved through their home like a steady rhythm, predictable, quiet, efficient. That calm unsettled him more than anger ever could. She packed Ethan's lunch, wiped the counter, kissed their son's forehead, and never once asked where Daniel was rushing to every evening. At work, Daniel was celebrated. Promotions came easily, praise followed him into elevators, and strangers knew his name. At home, no one clapped. Miriam spoke about school pickups, dentist appointments, and Ethan's reading progress. Daniel told himself this was normal, that marriages simply age this way, but the thought felt like a cage tightening around his chest. Clara entered his life like an interruption. She laughed loudly, dressed sharply, and listened as if Daniel were saying something rare and brilliant. She asked about his ambitions, not his responsibilities. When she touched his arm, she made him feel visible again, as if he had been temporarily forgotten by the world and suddenly rediscovered. The Stratton Gala invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, embossed and exclusive. Daniel stared at it longer than necessary. He imagined a room, tailored suits, champagne flutes, admiration. He also imagined Miriam, beside him, sensible dress, quiet smile, answering questions about their son. The image embarrassed him, and that realization startled him. That evening, Daniel told Miriam he had a small team dinner. The lice slid out smoothly, rehearsed in his head before it reached his mouth. Miriam paused only briefly, nodded, and returned to rinsing rice in the sink. Her trust felt undeserved, and instead of stopping him, it made the lie feel heavier. Later that night, Daniel deleted the Gala email from their shared tablet. His hands trembled slightly as he did it. He told himself it was harmless, just one night, just work. Upstairs, Miriam read Ethan a bedtime story, her voice gentle, steady, unquestioning. Across town, Clara stood in front of her mirror, holding up 2 dresses. She texted Daniel a photo of the darker one. He replied immediately. The speed of his response thrilled her. As Daniel lay in bed beside Miriam, staring at the ceiling, he felt a strange mix of excitement and shame. He convinced himself that he wasn't betraying his family, only protecting an image he had worked too hard to build. He turned toward Miriam, watching her sleep, and wondered when he had started seeing the woman who held his life together as something to hide. He did not notice that Miriam had already noticed everything. The silences, the excuses, the way his eyes drifted past her as if she were furniture. She said nothing because she was learning, observing, measuring what remained of herself inside the marriage. That night, as the house slept, Miriam opened her laptop and reread an old email thread marked confidential. It wasn't revenge she felt, only clarity. Somewhere between love and survival, she had chosen to stay awake. The decision was quiet, invisible, and patient, waiting for the moment truth would demand to be spoken aloud, without apology or permission again. Daniel liked the man he became around Clara. That version of himself spoke with confidence that bordered on charm, laughed without restraint, and never glanced at his phone to check the time. With her, he was not someone's husband or someone's father. He was simply Daniel, uninterrupted. Clara noticed everything. The watch he wore, the hesitation before he mentioned home, the way his voice softened when he talked about success. She asked questions that felt flattering rather than intrusive. When she listened, she leaned forward, eyes bright, as though his thoughts deserved space to expand. Daniel hadn't realized how starved he was for that attention until she fed it to him. They met often after work, always somewhere polished and dimly lit. Clara belonged in those spaces. She spoke easily about clients, brand image, and influence, words Daniel had begun to mistake for substance. When he complained about exhaustion, she told him he worked too hard. When he joked about family life, she laughed, never asking for details. The absence of judgment felt intoxicating. Yet Clara was not naive. One evening, as she traced the rim of her glass, she asked casually, "Does your wife ever come to these things?" Daniel hesitated only a second too long. He said Miriam preferred quieter evenings, that she wasn't fond of crowds. Clara nodded, but the question lingered between them like a held breath. Later, When Daniel showed her the Stratton Gala invitation, Clara's eyes lit up. She spoke about the guest list, the exposure, the power of being seen in the right rooms. Then she looked at him directly and asked who he was taking. Daniel felt the answer form before he could stop it. He said her name. That night, Daniel returned home late. Miriam was already asleep, Ethan's school bag packed neatly by the door. Daniel stood in the hallway, watching the soft rise and fall of his son's chest, guilt pressing briefly against his ribs. He told himself that providing stability excused small disappearances. Clara, meanwhile, lay awake replaying the evening. She knew Daniel was married. That had never been hidden. But knowing and confronting were different things. She wondered what kind of woman Miriam was, and whether Daniel was as important to his home life as he was to his career. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. At work the next day, Daniel moved with renewed energy. Compliments landed harder. Smiles lasted longer. He felt balanced, as if he had divided his life into parts that no longer collided. What he didn't see was how carefully he had begun to curate himself, choosing which version appeared where. By the time another gala reminder pinged his phone, Daniel no longer questioned his decision. He silenced the notification and slipped the phone back into his pocket, convinced that separation was control. He didn't realize that the distance he was creating was already choosing sides for him, quietly and without negotiation. Somewhere beneath his confidence, a fragile fear stirred, warning him that hidden lives always demand payment, eventually. Without mercy, always. Miriam accepted Daniel's explanation without comment, and that unsettled him more than resistance ever could. When he mentioned another late evening, she simply nodded, adjusting Ethan's collar before sending him off to school. There was no suspicion in her eyes, no demand for reassurance. Daniel mistook her calm for indifference and felt oddly relieved by it. The Stratton Gala occupied his thoughts throughout the day. Emails arrived with seating arrangements, security instructions, and the final program draft. Daniel read each one carefully, his name printed beside influential figures. The event promised visibility, leverage, and validation. He imagined standing among power, unencumbered by domestic details, and the fantasy hardened into resolve. That evening, Miriam cooked dinner while Daniel scrolled through his phone at the table. She spoke about Ethan's teacher and an upcoming school presentation. Daniel responded with distracted sounds, his attention tethered elsewhere. Miriam noticed, as she always did, but chose not to compete for his focus. She cleared the plates quietly and packed leftovers into containers labeled for the week. Later, Daniel rehearsed his lie again. Small team dinner, he whispered to himself in the bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie. The words felt harmless, even efficient. He had used them before, had refined them until they no longer tasted like dishonesty. He told himself that omission was not betrayal, that he was simply managing information. When Miriam handed him a cup of tea before bed, he flinched slightly, guilt flickering across his face. She asked if he was nervous about work. Daniel nodded, grateful for the easy escape. Miriam smiled gently, the kind of smile that came from familiarity, not performance. It reminded him of everything he had begun to avoid. Across town, Clara sent him a message asking about the gala schedule. She spoke of photographers, donor conversations, and the importance of first impressions. Daniel felt seen in a way that felt thrilling and shallow all at once. He replied eagerly, the glow of anticipation dulling his discomfort. What Daniel did not know was that earlier that afternoon, Miriam had received a phone call while folding laundry. A board member spoke quickly, apologetically, explaining that their keynote speaker had withdrawn unexpectedly. Miriam listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When they asked if she could step in, she did not answer immediately. After the call ended, Miriam sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, thinking. She remembered years of supporting Daniel's ambitions, rearranging her own schedule, quieting her voice so his could be louder. She remembered moments when she had shrunk herself without realizing it. The invitation felt less like an honor and more like a mirror. That night, while Daniel slept easily beside her, Miriam opened her laptop and reviewed the event details. She read the theme twice: integrity in leadership. Her mouth curved into something between sadness and resolve. She typed her acceptance calmly, professionally, and closed the laptop. In the darkness, the lie Daniel had rehearsed settled comfortably into place, unaware it was already surrounded. Daniel felt lighter the moment he stepped into the Stratton Gala. The air hummed with low conversations, polished laughter, and the soft clink of glasses. This was his world, the one where people measured worth by presence and posture. As he scanned the room, he straightened instinctively, slipping into the version of himself that knew how to belong. Clara walked beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She wore confidence as effortlessly as her tailored dress, greeting familiar faces, dropping names with practiced ease. Heads turned when they passed. Daniel noticed, and the attention fed something restless inside him. No one asked about Ethan. No one mentioned homework schedules or quiet dinners. Here, he was unencumbered. They were ushered toward their table, close enough to the stage to be seen, but far enough to observe. Daniel recognized executives, donors, and policymakers. He exchanged firm handshakes, accepted compliments, and smiled without effort. The lie he had built around the evening now felt justified, even necessary. Clara leaned in, whispering observations about the room. She spoke about optics, about how perception shaped power. Daniel nodded, absorbing her words as truth. He convinced himself that this was growth, that distancing himself from his home life was a form of evolution rather than escape. As servers poured champagne, Daniel relaxed fully. He checked his phone briefly, saw no messages from Miriam, and felt a strange relief. Silence, he told himself, meant peace. He did not question why that peace required her absence. An announcement crackled through the speakers, drawing attention to the evening's program. The host mentioned a last-minute change to the keynote address. Daniel barely registered it. His focus remained on the conversations around him, the validation in every nod and smile. Clara asked who the keynote speaker was. Daniel shrugged, admitting he hadn't checked. The detail felt unimportant. What mattered was being there, being visible, being admired. Across the room, staff adjusted lighting and microphones. The stage glowed softly, expectant. Daniel leaned back in his chair, confident, comfortable, untouchable. For the first time in weeks, his chest did not feel tight. Then the host spoke again, introducing the keynote speaker by name. Daniel's glass paused halfway to his lips. The sound of Miriam's name cut through the room with startling clarity. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. It was impossible. Miriam did not attend events like this, let alone lead them. She belonged to the background of his life, not the spotlight. Clara turned toward him, confused by his reaction. "Do you know her?" she asked. Daniel did not answer. His mouth had gone dry, his heartbeat suddenly loud in his ears. The room seemed to tilt slightly as applause rose. From the side of the stage, Miriam stepped into view. She wore a simple, elegant dress, nothing flashy, nothing performative. Her posture was steady, her expression composed. She did not scan the audience. She did not search for anyone. Daniel's confidence collapsed inward, replaced by a cold dread he could not control. The image he had so carefully constructed began to fracture, and for the first time that night, he understood that power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply walked onto the stage, already knowing exactly who it was. Daniel felt the shift before anyone else reacted. The applause rose automatically, polite and loud, but something in the room tightened. His vision narrowed as Miriam reached the podium, her heels quiet against the stage. She adjusted the microphone calmly, not once glancing toward the tables. Daniel couldn't breathe. The faces around him blurred, their expressions indistinct, but he could feel their attention pivoting. Clara leaned closer, whispering, "Is that your wife?" Her voice trembled slightly. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. His throat tightened, shame and fear colliding inside him. Miriam began without flourish. She thanked the organizers, acknowledged the late change, and smiled politely. Her voice was steady, measured, unhurried. It carried easily through the room, commanding attention without demanding it. Daniel felt exposed, as though she were speaking directly to him, even without looking. She spoke about leadership, about the difference between appearance and substance. She described how people learn to perform convincingly, crafting images that earn praise while neglecting the quiet commitments that sustain real lives. Each sentence pressed harder against Daniel's chest. Clara shifted uncomfortably. She glanced around, suddenly aware of the murmurs, the nodding heads, the thoughtful silences. She realized this speech was not abstract. It was precise. She saw the way Daniel's hands clenched together, the way his smile had vanished. Miriam continued, speaking of private failures hidden behind public success. She talked about promises made in kitchens and broken in boardrooms, about partners treated like accessories, convenient when polished, embarrassing when real. Daniel swallowed, the words cutting closer than accusation. She paused, letting silence stretch. Then she asked gently, "If you are ashamed of the person beside you, what does that say about you?" The question hung heavy, unanswered. Applause followed, louder this time, sincere and unsettled. Miriam nodded once, thanked them, and stepped back. She did not look toward Daniel. That omission hurt more than exposure. Clara stood abruptly, murmuring an excuse. Daniel watched her go, knowing something irreparable had cracked. As Miriam left the stage, dignified and unshaken, Daniel understood that the room had changed. And so had everything he thought he controlled. He remained seated, applause echoing, while his carefully arranged life collapsed inward. He had believed power meant being admired, unseen flaws protected by success. Watching Miriam, he realized true power required no disguise. It endured scrutiny and spoke plainly, even when it cost something. Around him, conversations resumed, softer now, thoughtful. Daniel felt their glances, imagined what they might assume. For the first time, he wanted to disappear. He reached for his phone, then stopped. There was no message that could undo what had been revealed. As the lights dimmed for the next segment, Daniel sat still, aware that the story he had told himself was over. The truth had entered the room calmly, spoken once, and left him exposed. What remained was not spectacle, but consequence. He would remember this moment not for the applause, but for the silence Miriam left behind. It was the sound of an ending he could not escape, only face, sooner than he had planned. Miriam returned to the podium after the applause faded, waiting until the room settled into attentive quiet. She placed her notes down, but never looked at them. Her hands rested calmly on the edges of a stand, steady, assured, unshaken. Daniel felt the pause, stretch, deliberate and powerful. "Integrity," Miriam said, "is not proven when people are watching." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "It is proven in the places no one applauds." Heads nodded across the room. Daniel's stomach tightened. She spoke about ambition, how it often masqueraded as sacrifice, how people justified absence, neglect, and broken promises by calling it success. "We reward visibility," she continued, "but ignore what it costs the people holding our lives together behind the scenes." Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. Clara sat rigid, eyes forward, realizing the speech was not theoretical. Miriam was not angry. That was the most devastating part. There was no bitterness in her tone, no sharp edge to brace against. Only clarity. Miriam described how some people curated public excellence while eroding private trust. They perform well under lights, she said, but fail quietly in kitchens and hallways. A ripple moved through the audience. Daniel's hands clenched beneath the table. She paused again. "We confuse image with substance," Miriam said. "We mistake admiration for character. And when the applause ends, we are surprised by the emptiness we feel." Daniel swallowed hard. Every word felt intentional, precise. Clara finally turned toward him, her expression pale. In that moment, she understood she had not been chosen for love or courage, but convenience. She was not special. She was useful. Miriam leaned slightly closer to the microphone. "Loved ones are not accessories," she said softly. They are not meant to be hidden, edited, or replaced when they no longer fit the image we are trying to sell. The sentence landed heavily. Then came the question, delivered without accusation. If you are ashamed of the person who knows you best, Miriam asked, are you really ashamed of them or of yourself? Silence followed, thick and undeniable. Daniel felt as though the room had narrowed to a single point, and he stood exposed within it. Miriam still had not looked at him. She did not need to. The truth had already found its mark. When applause erupted again, it was slower, deeper, unsettled. People clapped, not out of politeness, but recognition. Miriam thanked them briefly and stepped away. Clara rose immediately, murmuring that she needed air. Daniel did not stop her. He watched her disappear into the crowd, understanding that whatever they had shared had dissolved under the weight of honesty. As Miriam exited the stage, Daniel realized something terrifying and undeniable. She had not humiliated him. She had given him dignity he had refused to give her. And that, more than shame, was what broke him. The room returned to its program, but Daniel remained frozen, aware that the loudest reckoning often arrives without a single raised voice. The applause swelled again, filling the hall with approval that felt heavier than judgment. Daniel remained seated, hands locked together beneath the table, staring at the stage Miriam had already left. People around him rose, clapping with admiration, some nodding thoughtfully, as if they had just been handed a truth they planned to keep. Clara stood abruptly. Her chair scraped softly against the floor, a small, sharp sound that cut through Daniel's thoughts. She leaned close and whispered that she needed air. Her voice was tight, stripped of the confidence that had once drawn him in. Daniel nodded, unable to find words, watching as she slipped away into the crowd without looking back. Conversations resumed in fragments. Daniel caught pieces of dialogue drifting past, words like powerful, necessary, brave. Each compliment aimed at Miriam felt like a quiet indictment. He imagined what others might now assume, and for the first time, his reputation felt fragile, no longer protected by charm or performance. He finally stood, straightening his jacket out of habit. Across the room, Miriam moved with calm efficiency, exchanging brief professional greetings. She did not scan for him. She did not acknowledge his presence. That absence was deliberate, and it stung more than confrontation. Daniel crossed the room, heart pounding. When he reached her, she turned politely, offering a composed smile that belonged to the public version of herself. "Congratulations," he said weakly. "You were incredible." "Thank you," Miriam replied, her tone neutral. "This isn't the place to talk." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the surrounding guests. "Not about us." The boundary was clear. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. He nodded, stepping back as she moved on. He watched her walk away, realizing that access to her had always been a privilege he had mistaken for entitlement. Later, as the gala wound down, Daniel spotted Clara near the exit. Her makeup was flawless, but her expression was hollow. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away. Whatever fantasy they had shared had collapsed under the weight of reality neither of them had wanted to name. Daniel left alone. Outside, the night air was cool and unforgiving. He checked his phone instinctively. No messages from Miriam. He typed one anyway, then deleted it. For once, he had no right to demand conversation. Back home, the house was quiet. Ethan's backpack rested by the door, neatly packed. Miriam had taken him to her mother's, a detail Daniel had learned only in passing. The realization hit hard. She had made arrangements without him. She had protected her child without needing his permission. Daniel sat on the edge of the couch, the silence pressing in. He replayed Miriam's words, the calm certainty with which she had spoken. He understood now that she had not sought to embarrass him. She had simply refused to shrink herself any longer. Accessories, he realized, are meant to be displayed, replaced, or hidden. They do not carry weight. They do not breathe. Miriam had been breathing for both of them for a long time, and tonight she had finally exhaled. Daniel barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, Miriam's voice returned, steady, unflinching, impossible to interrupt. Morning arrived without relief. The house felt emptier than it ever had, even with furniture untouched and lights still off from the night before. He stood in the kitchen, staring at Ethan's cereal box, realizing too late how much routine Miriam had carried alone. His phone buzzed just after 9. A short message from Miriam. I can meet briefly before noon. Cafe on Alder Street. No greeting. No softness. Just structure. Daniel read it twice, unsure whether to feel hopeful or afraid. When he arrived at the cafe, Miriam was already seated by the window, a folder placed neatly beside her cup. She looked composed, not guarded, prepared. Daniel noticed how calm she seemed, as if she had slept well. That realization unsettled him more than anger would have. Thank you for coming, Daniel said, lowering himself into the chair. Miriam nodded. I have limited time. Her tone was even, professional. So let's be clear. He started to apologize, the words tumbling over one another, explaining stress, confusion, mistakes. Miriam lifted her hand gently, stopping him. I'm not here for explanations, she said. I'm here to tell you what's happening next. Daniel's chest tightened. Ethan, where is he? He asked. With my mother, Miriam replied. He's fine. He slept well. He has school tomorrow. She paused, letting the information settle. I'm not keeping him from you. I'm creating stability. The word landed heavily. Stability. Something Daniel had assumed was automatic. Something Miriam had quietly engineered for years. You didn't just lie to me, Miriam continued. You chose what you wanted people to see. And you decided I didn't belong in that picture. Her voice did not rise. That restraint made it harder to escape. Daniel tried to meet her eyes. I never meant to hurt you. I know, Miriam said. That's part of the problem. You didn't consider me at all. She folded her hands. I stopped offering pieces of myself because they kept falling into silence. I was drowning quietly, Daniel. And you were too busy being admired to notice. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were schedules, school plans, routines, Ethan's life mapped carefully. This isn't punishment, she said. It's preparation. I prepared myself, not just the documents. Daniel's throat tightened. Is this the end? Miriam studied him for a moment. This is me choosing peace, she said. Dignity. For myself. For our son. She stood, gathering her coat. We'll talk about logistics later, not emotions. As she walked away, Daniel realized the conversation had not been cold. It had been complete. And for the first time, he understood that clarity, once spoken, cannot be undone. Daniel arrived early, choosing a table near the back where the noise softened into a low hum. He rehearsed apologies in his head, each version sounding insufficient. When Miriam walked in, he stood instinctively, unsure whether to hug her or remain still. She gave a small nod and sat across from him, placing her bag beside the chair with deliberate calm. For a moment, neither spoke. Daniel noticed the steadiness in her hands, the absence of hesitation. It unsettled him. I've been thinking a lot, he began, leaning forward. About everything. I know I messed up. I was confused. I felt invisible. He paused, waiting for reassurance that never came. Miriam stirred her coffee slowly. You weren't confused, she said. You were selective. She looked up then, her gaze clear. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think it would cost you. Daniel flinched. That's not fair, he said quietly. I provided. I worked hard. You thought your effort excused your absence, Miriam interrupted. Her voice remained even. You didn't just leave physically, Daniel. You left emotionally long before Clara. The name landed without drama, stripped of power. He swallowed. I never stopped loving you. I know, Miriam replied. But love without attention feels like neglect. I kept showing up while you slowly checked out. She leaned back. I stopped offering pieces of myself because you treated them like background noise. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Why didn't you say something? I did, she answered softly. Many times. You just didn't hear me. She looked away briefly, then back. I was drowning quietly, carrying the house, our son, and the weight of pretending we were fine. Silence stretched between them, heavy but honest. Daniel's eyes burned. "I hate that I did this to you." "You didn't do this to me," Miriam said. "You did this to us. And then I chose to save myself." She reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward him. "This is Ethan's schedule. School routines. Weekends. Consistency." Daniel opened it slowly, his hands shaking. The pages were meticulous, thoughtful. "You planned all this," he whispered. "I had to," Miriam said. "I prepared myself, not just the documents." Her voice softened slightly. "I can't raise our son in uncertainty." He looked up, desperate. "Is there any chance?" Miriam stood, gently cutting him off. "This conversation isn't about chances. It's about truth." She met his eyes. "I choose peace, Daniel. And dignity." As she walked away, Daniel remained seated, the folder open before him. For the first time, he understood that consequences were not loud. They arrived quietly, organized, and final. Daniel sat alone at the cafe long after Miriam left, the folder still open in front of him. He read every page slowly, as if speed might undo its meaning. Ethan's school schedule, doctor appointments, emergency contacts, weekend routines. Everything was precise, thoughtful, deliberate. There was no anger in the pages, only foresight. For the first time, Daniel understood what preparation really looked like. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet work done in advance of disappointment. When he finally stood to leave, the chair across from him felt heavier than before. Outside, the world moved on without acknowledging the shift that had just occurred in his life. Cars passed. People laughed. Nothing paused for his regret. At home that evening, Daniel walked through the house more slowly than usual. Miriam's presence lingered everywhere, in the labeled containers in the fridge, the folded laundry, the neat stack of Ethan's books on the table. He realized how much of his life had been supported by invisible labor he had never thanked. His phone buzzed with a message from Clara. He stared at it for several seconds before opening it. She asked if they could talk, if they could explain what had happened. Daniel typed a response, deleted it, then typed again. Finally, he sent a single sentence, ending whatever they had pretended to build. Clara replied once, then went silent. Daniel sat on the couch, the folder resting beside him. He opened it again, this time noticing notes in Miriam's handwriting, small reminders about Ethan's fears, his favorite bedtime stories, how he needed reassurance during transitions. Daniel's chest tightened. Miriam had not only planned logistics, she had planned care. The next day at work, Daniel felt eyes on him. Conversations lowered when he passed. A colleague offered a tight smile. By afternoon, Mr. Harrington called him into his office. The conversation was brief but clear. "Don't let your personal life undermine your professional standing," his boss warned. "Your wife's excellence should not become your scandal." The words followed Daniel home. That night, Daniel attended his first therapy session. He spoke haltingly at first, then more honestly than he had in years. He admitted how much admiration had mattered to him, how easily he had confused attention with worth. Saying it aloud stripped the illusion of its power. Days later, Daniel attended Ethan's school event alone. He clapped louder than necessary, trying to fill the space Miriam once occupied beside him. When Ethan ran into his arms, Daniel held him tightly, aware of how fragile consistency could be. Later that evening, Daniel placed the folder carefully in a drawer, not as evidence of loss, but as instruction. Miriam had not left him empty-handed. She had left him a mirror. He did not know what the future would look like. He only knew that whatever came next would require humility, presence, and effort without applause. And this time, there would be no hiding behind image. Daniel learned quickly how loud silence could be. At work, people still greeted him, but something had shifted. Conversations stopped when he approached. Laughter lowered. Compliments disappeared. He caught fragments of whispers in hallways, the kind that didn't need confirmation to wound. His name had become context, not admiration. Mr. Harrington called him in again a week later. This time, there was no warning, only a measured look of disappointment. "You're talented," his boss said, fingers steepled on the desk. But talent doesn't protect you from scrutiny. Don't let your wife's excellence become your scandal. The sentence landed heavier than before. Daniel nodded, understanding that his margin for error had vanished. At home, the evenings stretched endlessly. Ethan stayed with Miriam most nights, and the quiet Preston on Daniel's thoughts. He noticed how the house echoed now, how every sound felt amplified. He cooked for one, cleaned without purpose, and sat with his phone in his hand, resisting the urge to reach out. Clara texted once more, asking if he was sure. Daniel stared at the message for a long time before replying. He told her the truth, that she had never been the point. She responded with a short acknowledgement and nothing else. The affair ended not with drama, but with clarity. That somehow felt worse. Therapy became a fixture in Daniel's week. In that room, stripped of titles and reputation, he spoke about admiration, about how being seen had begun to matter more than being known. He admitted that he had mistaken validation for love and distance for independence. Naming his flaws did not absolve him, but it made them real. He began showing up differently for Ethan. He attended school pickups on his assigned days, learned routines he had once ignored, listened more than he spoke. Ethan noticed. Children always did. The boy's trust returned slowly, cautiously, like something once dropped and carefully retrieved. One evening, Daniel ran into Miriam briefly while exchanging Ethan. She was calm, composed, glowing in a way that had nothing to do with appearance. She thanked him for being on time and wished him a good night. There was no bitterness in her voice, only boundaries. Daniel realized she was thriving not despite the separation, but because of it. That night, Daniel sat alone and thought about the man he had been at the Gala, confident, admired, hollow. He understood now that applause fades quickly, but consequences linger. Miriam's strength had never needed validation. It had grown quietly while he was busy chasing noise. As Daniel prepared for bed, he caught his reflection in the mirror. For the first time, he didn't look away. He saw regret, yes, but also the possibility of change. It would not restore what he had lost, but it might shape what remained. And for once, that was enough to keep him standing. Daniel arrived early at the school auditorium, folding his hands as parents filled the seats. He watched Ethan from a distance, laughing with classmates, backpack bouncing. Pride rose, mixed with regret. This was the life he nearly missed. When the performance began, Daniel clapped too loudly, earning a small smile from Ethan. He understood then that presence mattered more than perfection. No applause followed him here, no titles, no image to maintain. Only attention, patience, and consistency were required, and for the first time, that felt like enough. It grounded him, reminding him growth begins quietly, without witnesses, sustained by deliberate daily choices alone. Afterward, Daniel waited by the doors for the usual exchange. Miriam arrived composed, greeting teachers, thanking volunteers. She handed Ethan's jacket to Daniel and nodded. Their conversation stayed practical, brief, respectful. Daniel accepted it without protest. He noticed how calm she seemed, how light she moved, unburdened. The realization hurt and healed simultaneously. Miriam had not grown cold. She had grown clear. As she left, Daniel felt gratitude replace entitlement, a necessary shift he wished had arrived sooner. He understood boundaries were kindness, protecting everyone involved, including himself, from repeating old patterns and avoidable wounds that once defined their marriage and reshaped his future. Work stabilized slowly. Daniel focused on listening, delivering, staying present. He declined events that demanded performance over substance. Colleagues adjusted, some surprised, others indifferent. Therapy continued, less confessional now, more instructional. Daniel learned humility was not humiliation. It was alignment. He learned remorse required repair, not promises. He learned consistency rebuilt trust incrementally. None of it was cinematic. All of it mattered. The absence of applause no longer frightened him. He felt anchored by routine, accountable to choices measured in weeks, not headlines. Each day offered practice, small corrections, honest effort. and the patience to continue without external validation or immediate, visible reward ever. Miriam's career expanded. Invitations followed. She chose selectively, prioritizing substance. At home, she cultivated peace, building a life spacious enough to breathe. Daniel watched from a respectful distance, proud and aware pride no longer granted access. He saw how underestimation had forged her strength, how silence had sharpened her resolve. She had carried weight without spectacle. Now she moved freely, unapologetic. Daniel recognized the lesson plainly. The people you hide often hold you up unseen until they decide not to anymore. It was not punishment, he realized, but consequence, arriving calmly, teaching responsibility without cruelty or drama, and demanding maturity he lacked before entirely. Years later, Daniel would remember the gala as a beginning, not an ending. The night image lost its authority and substance spoke quietly. He would tell Ethan that character is built when nobody is watching. The lesson endured. Miriam never returned to the role Daniel once assigned her. She didn't need to. The moral remained simple and unforgiving. If you feel ashamed of the one beside you, ask who you have become. Growth answers honestly. It asks for humility, presence,